From the nation's capital, this is The View from Washington with Congressman Buck McKeon. Your host, Congressman Buck McKeon.
Hi, welcome back to The View from Washington. I'm your host, Congressman Buck McKeon from the 25th District of California. I'm the senior Republican on the U.S. House Education and Labor Committee. I'm glad you've joined us today for the latest in our series of 30-minute programs that I'll be airing throughout the year to give you an inside view of what's happening in Washington, D.C. On our last show, we were grateful to have the United States Secretary of Education, Margaret Spellings, join us for an in-depth discussion about No Child Left Behind and the role of the Department of Education. Today, I'd like to continue that discussion. Let me start by welcoming Representative David Davis from the 1st District of Tennessee. Congressman Davis is a fellow member of the House Education and Labor Committee, who as a freshman member of Congress has done some wonderful work on behalf of America's students. He's supported such critical legislation as the Empowering Parents Through Choice Act, a bill that I introduced to give parents meaningful educational choices. He also joined us in the push for incentive pay for teachers who have a proven record of success in the classroom. This was a bill sponsored by our colleague, Representative Tom Price of Georgia. Mr. Davis also introduced legislation himself to support military communities and other areas with federally owned land. I'd like for us to discuss that in just a moment. I'm honored to have Congressman Davis with us here today. He's a true servant of the people and one who believes a well-educated citizenry means a more competitive society globally. Last year, he hosted a roundtable discussion with local teachers, community leaders, and stakeholders to hear firsthand how No Child Left Behind is working and how it can be made stronger. We'll touch on that in just a moment as well. David, welcome.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for your leadership in the committee. You do a wonderful job.
Well, thank you. This is one of those times where we pat each other on the back and then move forward. But you know, as I was talking a little bit before we started the program, when I get a chance at home to talk to people, they hear a lot of the bad things that are happening in Washington, and Congress's rating is quite low. And what I try to tell people is, you know, I've been here now almost 16 years, and I've met a lot of great people, and you're one of them. This is your first year, but you know, you get a chance to size people up, and I know you're a strong family man and a man of strong moral principles, and it really, frankly, is a joy to have you on the committee. You don't talk a lot, but when you do, what you say counts, and I listen all the time to what you have to say. Why don't we, as a start here, I'd like to assume that probably people that are watching don't even all know what No Child Left Behind is. And maybe if we just kind of give a little background as to what it is, and then we'll get into some of the substantive issues of it. In 1965, there was an act passed, Elementary Secondary Education Act, that brought the federal government into K-12 education at the local level. A lot of people think that federal government shouldn't have involvement. That act got the federal government involved, and the purpose was to help close the gap between minority students and those that weren't receiving a real education. There's a gap found between the haves and the have-nots of about 14% in their reading scores, their math scores. And since that act was passed in '65, we at the federal level, out of our local taxpayers' dollars, have spent about $85 billion, and that gap has not closed one iota. Well, President Bush came in with wanting to be the education president and passed what we called at the time No Child Left Behind, which was a reauthorization of that original act. And since then, what that act did was brought some accountability. It said, if we're going to keep putting this money out, we want to see some results. And so it said that at the 3rd and the 8th grade, we're going to have some testing and accountability, and we want kids to learn to read and have basic math skills. Now, a lot of people have thought that it went much further than that, did a lot of other things, and that's because it was the way it was implemented at the state level. Each state set their own standards and did their own implementation, but testing has shown that that is working, and African American students, Hispanic students are now testing higher than ever before since this was passed. So I think that gives us a little segue into what we can talk about where this came from. I'd like to ask you this seminar that you held, or this forum that you held at home with your educators. What happened? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I represent the 1st Congressional District of Tennessee, and that's primarily the tip end of Tennessee, over near the mountains of North Carolina and Virginia. A lot of people with a lot of common sense there, and if you look back at my history, my father's got a 6th grade education. It just goes to show that anybody, if they work hard, apply themselves, can do anything they want to in life, but it means that you have to go out there and apply yourselves. Henry Ford once said, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. And that's really what we need to do with our children. We need to instill in our children that desire and that knowledge, if they apply themselves, that they can work hard. And No Child Left Behind holds teachers accountable. And I think most teachers that I know in the mountains of East Tennessee feel like they ought to be held accountable. But it's almost like a three-legged stool. You hold the teachers accountable and you don't hold moms and dads accountable and you don't hold the student accountable. It doesn't matter how good the teacher is. You're still going to get a poor result. So you got to have a good teacher, you have to have a mom and dad that care, and then you have to have a student that's willing to do their homework and study for the test. If you do that, everybody's accountable and everybody wins. And that's what we found from the seminar that I did last year. We brought together Chamber of Commerce, we brought together local businesses, we brought together school board members and teachers and sat down and had this discussion. What can we do to better education in America? And what we came out is we need to continue to move every child forward. And we got to be very careful when we do No Child Left Behind, in my opinion, that we bring those along on the lower end of the percentile, but we don't hold those back on the front end of the percentile. So you don't need to be teaching to the test to get a result, because you may not be challenging those students that are willing to work hard and do their homework.
This had a positive. You had a positive feeling generated from that.
It was very good, and one of the things that we walked away with is the teachers actually felt someone was listening to them. You know, they hear the rhetoric coming out of Washington that teachers need to be held accountable, but they don't hear that everybody else needs to be held accountable. The way I look at education, teachers need to teach. They don't need to parent. We need a parent being the parent.
I think that's that. Our personalities are formed at a very young age, and you said everybody needs a father and a mother. You know, it's getting so society now. The ones that have a father and a mother are lucky. They're very fortunate. A lot of our society now, we're just down to one parent, or even if you have two parents, they're both working and they're not home and they're not able to spend as much time with children as probably you and I did when we were young people, and that's unfortunate. You have these bills in, two bills that you've co-sponsored about impact aid. Why don't you explain a little bit about what that means? You have a lot of military in your district.
Actually, if you look at my district, it's more of a mountainous region, and I have the National Forest Service coming in and buying up pieces of property.
Okay.
The county that I grew up in, called Unicoi County, is actually owned by either federal, state, or local government. Over 50% of the property in that county is owned by a government. Well, those governments don't pay taxes, so you have a school system that is depending on 17,000 people live in the county, and then half of that county is owned by a government entity that doesn't pay taxes, and it's really unfair to that school system to try to hold that school system to the same standards as a larger city school system. So I have some legislation that says if the federal government comes in and buys the property, then they ought to be willing to pay the taxes that anybody else would pay. And so they need to be held accountable as well.